The salty, humid air of the Jersey Shore on the 4th of July weekend is a unique perfume blend of ocean brine, fried dough, and the faint celebratory scent of gunpowder. It's the smell of freedom, of reckless abandon. That night it was the smell of the last normal moments of my life before a chasm opened up in my memory. A black hole that swallowed hours and left behind a terror I can't shake. My best friend, Jimmy, the impresario of the East Coast electronic music scene that had set us up. Me and our other childhood friend Ryan were his guests of honor at the biggest event his company had ever thrown. He was the king of his castle, and we were the favored members of his court. The venue was a sprawling club that spilled out onto the boardwalk, its bass thumping a heartbeat into the night, hours before the doors even opened. Ryan and I were deep into the complimentary top-shelf liquor, a privilege of our association with Jimmy. We were grown men, both of us towering over 6 feet, and we could hold our liquor, or so we thought. By the time the headlining DJ took the stage, the world was a pleasant, pulsating blur of neon lights and smiling faces. We weren't sloppy drunks, just happily anesthetized, our inhibitions lowered and our decision-making skills cheerfully impaired. As the night crescendoed towards its end, the familiar social calculus began. Where to next, and with whom? Jimmy had secured us beds at a nearby Airbnb, removing the logistical headache of getting home. That left the second, more primal question. That's when we saw them at the bar. 2 women who seemed to glow with an energy all their own. I think their names were Gianna and Marcella, but the memory is slippery, like trying to hold on to smoke. They were striking not just in their beauty but in their confidence. They carried themselves with an aristocratic air that seemed out of place, yet perfectly at home amidst the chaos. We, with our height as our primary social currency in the unique ecosystem of the Jersey Shore, approached them. The conversation was surprisingly easy, flowing past the usual nightlife platitudes. They were witty, intelligent, and disarmingly engaging. It was Marcella who suggested we leave, her voice a smooth melody over the pounding music. Then came the first strange note in the symphony of the evening. Gianna handed us each a drink, a vibrant, colorful concoction in a heavy glass, insisting we get on their level before we departed. It was unorthodox, a reversal of the usual script, but they exuded such an aura of wealth and sophistication that we didn't question it. We were flattered. We drank. The liquid was cool and tasted vaguely of exotic fruit, but there was an undercurrent, a faint, almost medicinal bitterness that I registered for only a second before dismissing it. We downed the drinks and moved as a quartet toward the exit. The moment the sticky night air hit us, Marcella proposed we go to her place. It was close, she said, right on the beach, and infinitely nicer than whatever inland rental we had. She wasn't wrong. The allure of a private beach house was too potent to resist. The walk along the shore was surreal. The sand was cool underfoot, the moon a silver coin in the inky sky. The conversation deepened, touching on art, literature, and philosophy. I remember a profound sense of refreshment, talking about something other than the vapid nonsense that usually fills the air at 2 a.m. But a new feeling began to creep in, a subtle but insistent physical wrongness. I felt a wave of dizziness, far more intense than my level of alcohol consumption should have allowed. It wasn't the familiar spin of being drunk, it was a heavy, melting sensation. My legs felt like they were made of wax, threatening to give way. My limbs grew distant, my tongue thick. A strange numbness, like a limb falling asleep, tingled at the edges of my perception. I felt a flash of embarrassment, worrying I was making a fool of myself in front of these brilliant women, unable to articulate a coherent thought. And then, as quickly as it came, the feeling subsided, leaving behind only the familiar buzz of a drunken night. We arrived at the house. It wasn't just a house, it was a monument. A stark, modernist structure of glass and white concrete that seemed to have risen from the sand itself. Inside, the opulence was breathtaking but unnerving in its perfection. It was a museum masquerading as a living room. Polished concrete floors gleamed under recessed lighting, and bizarre, beautiful sculptures stood on minimalist pedestals. Everything was a shade of white, gray, or black. It was so clean, so sterile, it felt like no one actually lived there. It was a showroom for a life of impossible wealth and taste. Even the air smelled different, clean and faintly ozonic, like the air after a thunderstorm. I wish I had taken a picture, but my mind was elsewhere. Ryan's certainly was. Within 15 minutes, he and Marcella had vanished into one of the house's many corridors, their laughter echoing faintly before being swallowed by the silence. I was alone with Gianna. She moved closer, her eyes locking onto mine. She leaned in to kiss me. I saw the dark pools of her irises, the faint smile on her lips, and then nothing, a hard absolute cut. Not a fade to black, but a cinematic splice. The film of my life just snapped. I know I didn't just pass out. The proof is on my phone, a digital ghost of my missing hours. There are text messages, sent from my device, in my style of speaking, to Jimmy, my parents, co-workers. They paint a picture of a normal, uneventful end to the night. One to Jimmy thanked him and said we'd crashed at a friend's. One to my dad assured him we were safe. Another to a girl I'd been casually seeing was a generic thinking of you message. They were all plausible, yet they contradicted each other and the truth. They were lies perfectly constructed to placate anyone who might come looking for us. They were a digital alibi for a crime I couldn't remember. This wasn't a blackout. I've been blackout drunk before, and it's a patchy fog, a collection of disjointed snapshots. This was a void, a surgically removed portion of my existence. And Ryan, I would later find out, experienced the exact same temporal amputation at the exact same moment. The next thing I knew, I was waking up to the blinding glare of the midday sun. I was lying in a patch of scratchy bushes off the side of an unfamiliar road. The first sensation was a throbbing, chemical headache that felt entirely different from a hangover. It was deeper, seated in the core of my brain. My mouth was bone dry. My body ached with a profound, cellular exhaustion. I was wearing clothes that were not my own. A cheap, ill-fitting t-shirt and worn-out jeans. My own clothes were gone. My wallet, gone. My keys, gone. The only things that remained were my shoes, but even they were violated. The laces had been meticulously removed, and the leather was soaked through with a dampness that didn't smell of salt or chlorine. It smelled of damp earth and something vaguely sweet, like decay. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced the fog of my disorientation. Where was I? How did I get here? The blankness in my mind was the most terrifying part. It was a wall I couldn't scale. What had been done to me in those lost hours? Robbery seemed too simple, too mundane for the sheer strangeness of the situation. I stood up, my legs trembling, and scanned my surroundings: trees, a curving road, and across the street, a beacon of civilization in the desolate landscape. The clerk, a weary-looking man, eyed my disheveled state with suspicion but slid his phone across the counter when I told him mine had been stolen. I called my sister, my fingers fumbling with the unfamiliar keypad. Her number was one of the few I still knew by heart. She gave me Ryan's number. I called him again and again, voicemail. The dread intensified. Had the same thing happened to him? Was he lying in another set of bushes somewhere? As I was about to dial 911, the door chimed, and in walked Ryan. He looked as wrecked as I felt, wearing a similar uniform of stranger's clothes. We stared at each other, a silent acknowledgement of our shared nightmare passing between us. His story mirrored mine exactly, down to the last terrifying detail. The police were called. They listened with a professional patience that slowly curdled into skepticism. "Are you sure you didn't just drink too much?" one of them asked, the question hanging in the air like an accusation. They saw two hungover guys from out of town, not two victims of a bizarre, inexplicable crime. When my sister tracked my iPhone to a parking lot a few minutes away, where both our phones sat side by side on the asphalt, it only cemented their theory. We were just irresponsible drunks who had lost our things. They gave us their cards and left us there. The ride home with Jimmy was a frantic, paranoid spiral of speculation. We had been drugged, that much was certain. But no known date-rape drug allows the victim to remain conscious, to send coherent, situationally aware text messages, only to have the memory of doing so completely erased. Why go to such elaborate lengths? Why steal our wallets but not use our cards? Why change our clothes? Why remove our shoelaces? Why transport us an hour away and dump us in the bushes? Every question led to a more sinister and improbable answer. We checked our bodies for cuts, for incisions, our minds immediately jumping to the urban legend of organ harvesting. Nothing. Weeks later, unable to let it go, Ryan and I drove back to the shore. We retraced our steps along the boardwalk, hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. And we found it, the house. It looked just as stark and imposing in the daylight. We walked up the pristine walkway and rang the bell. An older man, weathered and tired-looking, answered the door. I asked him if a Marcella lived there, if he had a daughter or granddaughter our age. He looked at me, his eyes betraying nothing, and gave a simple, firm no. I left that day with a sickness in my stomach that has never truly gone away. It wasn't just fear, it was a feeling of profound violation, the chilling certainty that something truly monstrous had happened in that house. I don't believe those girls were simple criminals. They were something else, part of something bigger, colder, and more organized than I can comprehend. I am left with the terrifying conviction that Ryan and I were test subjects in some unspeakable experiment. They didn't want our money. They didn't want to kill us. They wanted our minds. They wanted to see if they could take a piece of our lives, replace it with a fiction of their own making, and leave us adrift in the wreckage. They succeeded. I will never know what happened during those missing hours, but I know that a part of me never left that sterile White House. It's still there, trapped in the dark, screaming in a silence that I can never hear. My name is Ariel. I live in a quiet corner of Georgia where the humidity hangs heavy and the nights are filled with the sound of cicadas. For a long time, the deepest fear I knew was a primal, childish aversion to the dark. I now know what real fear is. It isn't the absence of light. It's the presence of a predator, cloaked in the mundane, relentlessly closing in. It was the summer after I graduated college, a few years back. My friend Isabel, who lived across the state line in a small Alabama town, threw a 4th of July cookout. It was a perfect slice of Southern Americana, the smell of grilled meat, the pop and fizz of bootleg fireworks, and the easy laughter of friends. I stayed late, soaking in the good energy, and didn't start the 2-hour drive home until well after 10 p.m. That was my first mistake. The route home was a tapestry of back roads, long hypnotic stretches of 2-lane asphalt cutting through dense forests and sleeping farmland. The world outside my 2012 Corolla was an abyss. The tree lines on either side were impenetrable walls of black, occasionally broken by the lonely silhouette of a farmhouse or a tiny white steepled church. I had my music playing low, a soft folk melody that did little to fill the profound silence of the rural night. There's an inherent spookiness to those roads after dark, a feeling that you're trespassing through a world that belongs to something else. About 30 minutes into the drive, a pair of headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. At first, it was a comfort, a fellow traveler in the void, but the comfort soon began to curdle into unease. The car, a gray Nissan Altima, settled in behind me and stayed there. It wasn't just following the same road, it was tethered to me. I could see it clearly whenever we passed under the occasional sodium lamp at a crossroads. It was an unremarkable car, except for the lower half, which was caked in a thick layer of reddish-brown mud, as if it had been driven through a swamp. Tried to dismiss the growing knot in my stomach. Maybe the driver was just timid. But after several miles, the unease solidified into cold certainty. No matter my speed, the distance between us remained unnervingly constant. I pushed my Corolla up to 10 miles over the speed limit. The Altima matched me instantly. I tapped my brakes, letting my speed drift down, testing it. The gray car slowed in perfect synchrony, maintaining its position about 6 car lengths back, its headlights to unwavering eyes in my mirror. These roads are made for passing. I nudged my car to the right, hugging the shoulder to give them ample room. I did it twice, an unspoken invitation to go around. They didn't. They just stayed there, a silent, patient shadow. The pretense of coincidence evaporated. They were following me. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. A sick, metallic taste filled my mouth. Why? Who were they? What did they want? I was a lone woman on a deserted road in the middle of nowhere. Every possible scenario that flooded my mind was a new shade of terror. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I had to get away. Dot up ahead, I saw a small side road, a dark slash in the trees. It looked like a short residential street, the kind with only a handful of houses. Without signaling, I wrenched the wheel and made the sharp left turn, my tires squealing on the pavement. My plan was to lose them, to force them to continue straight, to break the invisible leash that bound us. For a few glorious seconds, the road behind me was black. I allowed myself a breath, a flicker of hope. But then, about 10 seconds later, the twin beams of the Altima's headlights swung into view, cutting through the darkness as it made the same impossible turn. There was a 0% chance they lived on this dead-end road. It was no longer a question. I was being hunted. The feeling was primal, the kind of terror an animal must feel when it knows the predator is behind it. It was a feeling of utter helplessness, a physical sensation of being pinned of my life, being in the hands of a faceless stranger in a mud-caked car, just as the full weight of my peril crashed down on me. My car betrayed me. A shrill, hateful chime echoed through the cabin, and the low fuel light flashed on the dashboard. I swear to God, a sob escaped my lips. It was a moment of such profound cinematic despair that it felt unreal. My old Corolla was a fickle beast. Sometimes the light meant I had 20 miles of range. Other times it meant I was running on fumes and had less than 10. Out here, a gas station wasn't a guarantee. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my phone, my eyes darting between the road ahead and the menacing glare in my mirror. I frantically typed 24-hour gas station into the map. The nearest one was over 8 miles away. 8 miles. It might as well have been 100. I couldn't pull over, I couldn't stop. Stopping meant they would catch me. I had no choice but to push on, praying to a god I wasn't sure I believed in. Asterisk, my mind became a torture chamber, replaying scenarios of what would happen when the engine sputtered and died. Would they drag me from the car? Would they use a weapon? The gas needle dropped below the E-line, lying flat against the peg. The engine seemed to cough, every sound magnified, every vibration a sign of its imminent death. The road stretched on, an endless black ribbon. I felt a surge of self-loathing, hating myself for being so powerless, for driving so late, for not telling someone my route. And then, through the trees, I saw it, a faint, heavenly glow, the sign for a gas station. I have never felt a wave of relief so powerful it was physically painful. I nearly wept. As I approached the turn, I formulated a plan. I swerved hard into the brightly lit lot, not even bothering to pull up to a pump, just wanting to create distance. I didn't turn the car off. I threw the door open and ran. I sprinted into the convenience store, my lungs burning, not daring to look back until the glass door shut behind me. From the relative safety of the store, I watched through the large front window. The gray Altima slowed to a crawl at the edge of the lot, its engine a low rumble. It just sat there for 10, maybe 15 agonizing seconds, an eternity. The windows were too dark to see inside. It felt like the driver was considering their options, debating whether to follow me into the light. Then, with a sudden squeal of tires, the car peeled out, accelerating rapidly and disappearing back down the dark road we had come from. The clerk, a kind man with tired eyes, saw the terror on my face and asked if I was okay. I stammered out the story, and he immediately offered to call the police. Waiting for the sheriff's deputy to arrive was agonizing. Even after giving my statement, a deep, unshakable dread clung to me. It wasn't the scariest thing that could have happened, I told myself. They didn't actually do anything, but that was the problem. The not knowing, the sinister potential energy that had crackled in the air between our two cars. That feeling of being prey is something I hope I never have to experience again. I made it home that night and swore I would never again drive those rural roads after dark. But the story doesn't end there. The true horror came a few weeks later. I was at home, watching the local news, the television providing background noise to my evening. A segment came on about a manhunt in rural Alabama. My blood ran cold. The report detailed the crimes of 2 men wanted for a string of violent armed robberies and at least 1 attempted murder. They showed a blurry, grainy security camera still of one of the suspects and mentioned that authorities believed they had fled in a stolen vehicle, a stolen gray Nissan Altima, last seen headed east. I froze. The remote slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. The timing, the location, the exact description of the car, it was them. There was no doubt in my soul. The men who had terrorized innocent people, who had maybe even killed someone, were the same men who had hunted me through the dark Alabama countryside. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The sick feeling in my stomach was no longer about a creepy encounter. It was the chilling recognition of how close I had come to being one of their victims. That night wasn't a random scare. They were hunting. They had chosen me. And if my gas tank had been just a little bit emptier, if that gas station had been another mile down the road, I would have become another one of their statistics. The memory transformed from a frightening story into a near-death experience. I called the police immediately and told them everything. The feeling that haunts me most now isn't just the fear of what happened, but the crushing guilt of what didn't. My irrational fear of making it real by calling 911. That night might have allowed 2 extremely dangerous men to escape. That inaction, born of terror, is a heavy burden to carry. I never heard if they were caught. I check the news sometimes, searching for their faces, for a resolution that will never come. But I know they are out there, and I know that for a few terrifying hours, their world and my world collided, and I am the one who, by some miracle, drove away. My name is Jimmy. People in the scene know me. I'm the guy who makes things happen, the one who turns a cavernous, empty club into a pulsating universe of light and sound for a few hours. I build temporary kingdoms, and for that, my friends, get to be princes. But with that power comes a responsibility I never truly understood until the night I almost lost 2 of them to a darkness I couldn't see. The 4th of July event on the Jersey Shore was supposed to be my masterpiece. Biggest venue, biggest DJ, biggest crowd, my best friends. The narrator and Ryan, men I've known since we were kids stealing candy from the corner store, were there to celebrate with me. I set them up with VIP access and an open tab. It was my way of saying thank you for being there. Since the beginning, I was buzzing with the energy of the night, a whirlwind of logistics and schmoozing, making sure the intricate clockwork of the event ran smoothly. I saw them from time to time across the crowded room, laughing, drinks in hand, having the time of their lives. It made me happy. As the event wound down and the crowd began to thin, I started looking for them. I'd told them they had beds at the Airbnb I'd rented, a place just a few blocks away. I figured I'd round them up and we'd head out, but they were gone. I wasn't worried at first. They were both good-looking tall guys. It was a target-rich environment. I assumed they'd done what guys their age do and found some after-party companionship. Then the first text came through on my phone. It was from the narrator. "Hey man, amazing show tonight. Unbelievable. We met some people. Gonna crash at their buddy's place. See you tomorrow." It sounded like him, but there was something off. Too formal, too neat for how drunk I knew he'd been. A few minutes later, a similar one from Ryan. "Epic night, bro. We're good. Found a couch to surf, talk tomorrow." The messages should have reassured me, but they did the opposite. An alarm bell, faint but insistent, started ringing in the back of my mind. It was the coordination that felt wrong. 2 separate placating texts in quick succession. It felt rehearsed. I called the narrator's phone. Straight to voicemail. I called Ryan. Same thing. Now the alarm bell was clanging. These guys always answered my calls, no matter what. I started to circle the emptying venue, my earlier elation souring into anxiety. I asked the security guys at the door if they'd seen 2 tall guys leave with a couple of girls. One of them grunted in the affirmative. "Yeah, saw em leave with those 2 classy ones, the ones who looked like they owned the place." That detail didn't help. Back at the empty Airbnb an hour later, the silence was deafening. The two empty beds seemed to mock me. I paced the floor, my phone in my hand. My anxiety was churning into a thick, sickening dread. I was responsible for them. I had invited them, given them the unlimited booze, thrown them into this world. I sent them both a series of texts. Where are you? Call me. Seriously, what's the address? No response. The night dragged on. I couldn't sleep. I reread their texts over and over, dissecting every word. Crash at their buddy's place. Found a couch to surf. They were similar but different enough to seem independent, yet so close in timing and function. It was like someone had written the script for them. The feeling grew stronger. They hadn't written those texts. Someone else had, someone who wanted me to stop looking for them. The sun came up and there was still no word. By 10 a.m. I was bordering on full-blown panic. I was imagining the worst: car accidents, alcohol poisoning, fights gone wrong. I was about to call the local hospitals and then the police when my phone finally rang. It was the narrator. The relief that washed over me was so intense it made me dizzy, but it vanished the second he started talking. His voice was raw, confused, and terrified. He told me a fragmented, insane story about waking up in the bushes an hour away, wearing a stranger's clothes, with no wallet, no keys, and a huge, terrifying gap in his memory. And Ryan was with him. Picking them up was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. They looked hollowed out, their usual confidence replaced by a twitchy, haunted look. They smelled of damp earth and fear. Listening to their full story on the ride home, about the brilliant, wealthy girls, the sterile beach house, the weird drug effects, and the complete amnesia, I felt a chilling sense of guilt. This had happened on my watch. The police had dismissed them, but I couldn't. I'm a promoter. My business is people. I know how to read them, how to connect with them, and how to find things out. I couldn't let this go. A week later, after they had gone back and found the house only to hit a dead end with the old man, I decided to do my own digging. I started with my network. I called the owner of the venue, a guy I've done business with for years. I described Gianna and Marcella based on what the narrator had told me. Strikingly beautiful, wealthy, confident, maybe late 20s. The venue owner went quiet for a moment. "Jimmy," he said, his voice lower, "you need to be careful. There are people who rent out high-end properties on the shore for private functions. They're not on Airbnb. It's all word of mouth, very exclusive, very discreet. The women you're describing sound like hostesses for those kinds of parties. They're not what they seem." He gave me a name, not a real name, but a handle of a guy who arranges security for these events. A guy named Silas. Finding Silas took some doing, a chain of calls to progressively shadier contacts. I finally got him on the phone, telling him I was a promoter looking for high-end, discreet security and that the venue owner had recommended him. I casually mentioned the house my friends had ended up at, describing its location and modernist. Looked out again, that chilling silence on the other end of the line. "That's not a party house," Silas said, his voice flat and cold. "That's a clinical property. You and your friends need to forget you ever saw it. You need to drop this now." The line went dead. Clinical property. The phrase echoed in my mind. It explained the sterile, minimalist decor, the feeling that no one lived there. It wasn't a home, it was a laboratory. The pieces started clicking into place with horrifying clarity. The strange drug that didn't just knock them out but kept them functional while erasing their memory. The perfectly crafted alibi texts. The removal of their clothes and possessions. The transportation to a remote location. This wasn't a robbery. Gone weird. This wasn't a prank. My friends had stumbled into the path of an organization that conducts illicit human trials. They were guinea pigs. Gianna and Marcella weren't just wealthy girls. They were recruiters, predators who scouted for suitable test subjects, people who were drunk, disoriented, and wouldn't be missed for a few hours. They tested some new chemical, some new psychological technique on my friends. They studied their reactions, took notes, and then scrubbed the evidence, returning them to the world like lab rats released back into the maze, leaving them with nothing but a scar on their psyche. The full weight of what had happened crushed me. The sick, unsettling feeling the narrator described, I felt it now. It was the feeling of peering into an abyss and seeing something truly evil stare back. These people weren't just criminals. They were monsters in plain sight, operating with a level of sophistication and resources that was terrifying. Citizens. Warning was not a suggestion. It was a threat. They knew I was asking questions. I never told the narrator or Ryan the full extent of what I suspect. What would be the point? There's no proof. No one to go to. Telling them would only deepen their trauma, replacing the frightening mystery with a horrifying certainty. So I carry this knowledge alone. I live with the guilt of leading them to the slaughterhouse doors and the constant knowing fear that the people from the clinical property know who I am and what I know. Every time my phone rings with an unknown number, my blood runs cold. I built a kingdom of music and light, but on the edge of my kingdom, there is a shadow. And I know that I brought my friends, my brothers, right to its edge. And I don't know if it will ever let them go.